Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Teachers Talking. This is your host, Edward Mag, with my guest, Aaron Stabell. He is a teacher and music performer in New York.
How you doing?
Good. How are you doing today?
Doing great.
Yeah. Aaron, so up until this point, everyone who's been on this show has been someone that I met in college at some point, and you're the first person who's just a teacher who reached out to me.
Yeah.
So thank you for being making that first bridge.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, no problem. I mean, I think it's good to. I saw a couple of your episodes, and I thought you were into some cool stuff. So I thought it was worth throwing my hat in the ring at least.
Yeah. So thanks for being on. So why don't you tell us a little about yourself, Aaron? When did you decide to become a professional musician?
Sure. So I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and that's not that close to New York City. First, I think some people who aren't like aware of where the geographics of New York, that's like about 6 or 7 hours away. So
Wow.
we're way closer to like Cleveland, Ohio, or Toronto. Those are bigger cities that are closer than New York by a lot. And I live in Rochester, New York now, so that's about an hour closer to New York City, but we're still like pretty far away.
Yeah.
Like you can get to Canada much quicker. So just so that that's clear. So when I grew up in Buffalo, my parents were both musicians. My dad was a music teacher for 40 years, taught orchestra. And my mom played the drums. She like kind of was in and out of the professional music world a little bit as I was growing up, and she did some other things too. Got her master's in education and stuff like that. So those two things were pretty pervasive in my household: the idea of education and the idea of music being really important. And I started out on violin as a kid, like Suzuki violin, and that was good. And then my teacher had like a car accident, and she couldn't really teach anymore, so it sort of put that on hold. And right around that time, I was starting to get into the point in school where they would let me choose an instrument. So then I sort of got interested in drums from my mom's side of things. And so I started drums in school, and it was what I was good at and I was passionate about all through school. And I was okay at some other things, but I wasn't really great at them, or I didn't put as much effort into them, I guess.
Right.
And so I did, my high school program was very much like a super strong program, at least from where I lived. We had a really great wind ensemble and marching band and jazz ensemble, and all those aspects were really strong. So I found a pretty strong identity there early on. And then I saw some of my older friends were pursuing music in different ways, and I thought that was kind of always what I thought I would do. When I was in middle school, I studied with a percussionist in the Buffalo Philharmonic named Jack Brennan.
Wow.
And then he moved out of town. And so for a while, I was on like a very strong classical percussion path. And once he moved, I was sort of rudderless for a while. And then my dad was playing some kind of workshop or something at Eastman, where he went to college. And he met the drum set teacher there, who was named Rich Thompson. And then he said, well, you could take lessons with Rich Thompson for a while and just see what that's like. And I didn't realize that those were really going to be just drum set lessons
Right.
until actually I got to the first one and tried to play snare drum solos. And he was like, no, we don't really do that here. So then I sort of switched gears. I still played, all kinds of classical stuff through high school, but more like just on my own. But I was really studying to become a drum set player. And at the time, I didn't really have a strong preference either way. I didn't mind it, but it was fun and it was cool. And so then I did some summer programs, and by the time I got to junior year of high school, I think it was pretty clear to me what I was going to do in some shape or form. And so I took some auditions. I auditioned at SUNY Purchase, which is close to New York City. It's a very strong music school up this way. And I auditioned at Eastman, where my dad had gone, and that's where I ended up starting school and continued to study with my same teacher. And I thought I was going to be like a straight performance major, and I think my dad on the audition day, like secretly signed me up for music ed as well. And he said like, oh, you have a couple of these interviews you have to go to. And I didn't really know what they were about or anything. And so I just went to, they said, can you sing and play Happy Birthday on the piano at the same time? And I was like, sure, I can do these things, and then I got accepted into the music ed program. So I said, I guess I went along with it, and I always thought of it at first as being sort of a fallback. And was not really sure I ever wanted to become a teacher. I was doing it to do it, in college. And then when I student taught, that was when I really kind of realized how much I enjoyed it, working with actual students and, doing it for real, sort of. So that got me really excited about it. And up until that point, I wasn't totally sure, but I probably was going to try to do some kind of, move to New York and become a jazz drummer or something like that, like a lot of my peers ended up doing. But instead, I really fell in love with being a teacher, and honestly, like a lot of the things that go along with it, like a more kind of stable lifestyle and, having kind of a normal place to live and a family. And those were some things that I had high on my priority list that were looking like they were going to be pretty difficult if I chose the other path. So after that, I guess I still wasn't sure. I sort of was always dipping just one toe in. And then finally, one of my professors said, there's this part-time job that's open and you don't have any job right now. And so maybe you would want to try that. And I think I had taken a few interviews maybe in my district where I grew up. And those weren't successful for whatever reason. So other than that, though, I wasn't really like, searching for a job or anything. I was teaching a lot privately, working with some marching bands. And that was kind of getting me through, financially and whatever at that point. And so I got this part-time job in this district called Greece, which is the district I've taught in now for going on 15 years.
Wow.
And now I'm the department coordinator for the district and teach at a high school. And I've had all kinds of different jobs within the district. I've taught, all levels pretty much, except for K through 2. But I've taught general music, and I've taught band, and I've taught hybrid, all different kinds of combinations. So that was it. I just kind of ended up where I was, and I guess I've taken maybe a couple interviews other places since then, but really not too many. It's become a home for me, and I'm pretty happy. So that was the long-winded version of my path to where I am, I suppose.
Yeah. Wow, that was really good. It was well, okay, sorry. Trying to organize my thoughts here. So let's see. When you were you said by like junior year of high school, you basically had figured out what you wanted to do. Had you had much experience like in leadership or anything at that point in band, or were you just thinking like, I want to do music?
I mean, I was sort of like a de facto leader as by being a strong player, I think, in high school. I was we didn't have real strong, like, there was section leaders for the marching band, I suppose. So I did that when I was a junior. And then my senior year, I was the drum major of the marching band. So I guess that counts. And I think I was always sort of the kind of person that would do my own thing too. So I think people either gravitated to that or didn't.
Right.
I wasn't in any kind of other scenario where I would be like the boss, though. I never did. I played baseball, and I was the captain of the baseball team for a couple of years too. So I guess that was it. But I never. I still look at people that I see as teachers today. I don't really necessarily feel all the time like it's a leader. I feel like I just have information to share with folks.
Okay.
And I hope that they'll come to want to learn it. But I was never really interested in being in charge, so to speak. So I guess it's kind of strange that my path has taken me where it has. Even with my own family, like my kids and stuff, I'm like, I don't really want to yell at anybody here. Just, try not to do that bad thing. So I guess not really, but it's something I learned along the way.
Sure. I mean, it's I think it's interesting that the profession attracts so many different like personalities, um, and maybe it's like at least for Californians for Southern California, our we have such a big emphasis on marching band. I think more than a lot of other places in America.
Sure.
Um, and so I think at least down here, that we tend to attract a lot of the people who are really into it, who are really like out there on the field yelling at people to get
Right.
everyone moving.
Yeah,
Um,
I never was into that personally. I
mhm,
think that in a lot of even through school and everything, I think I surprised myself and some of my teachers and stuff with where I ended up because I guess I mean you don't know because we don't know each other very well, but I'm not really like a I was not a typical student or a typical. I kind of got in trouble a lot as a
okay.
kid, like not the kind of real bad trouble, but just sort of like I was always, getting my seat moved in class and stuff, just trying to be funny and
Uh,
laughing a lot and stuff like that. So, and I look back as a teacher now and I'm like, yeah, I see exactly how that probably drove my teachers nuts. I had a lot of potential, but I was way more interested in having fun
right.
than I was in any kind of, and I remember pretty clearly we had a drumline guy that was our teacher for a while, and he was like trying to get me to stand up real straight and do all the like kind of regimented things that come
Yeah.
with that culture. And I just I like couldn't do it. I like laughed. I was like, I don't know. It's not really me. It wasn't ever something that I thought about.
Right.
And, as I later became a teacher of that kind of activity, and, I see the value in it a lot. And I probably could have used more of it in my own development, frankly. But it just wasn't, I just wasn't really, that wasn't the culture of our school at the time in the marching band was real good. But, it wasn't like we didn't have a big drum corps presence like a lot of high school
Yeah.
marching bands do, just because of the geographics. There's not really a close drum corps. There were some in Rochester, some DCA corps back then,
Hmm.
but maybe one or two people had seen that, not the majority of people.
Right.
And so for us, it was more about just like carrying the idea of uh, having high standards in the concert hall out onto a football field. That
Right.
was sort of what marching band felt like for us. And so it didn't ever seem like a thing to me that was, I don't know. Sometimes I still wonder how much emphasis is put on that sort of thing and how much that really contributes to the overall. But I definitely have a lot of respect for that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to find a balance, and I think different focuses work for different schools. So it's hard to say. I know there's a lot of people that especially at the higher up levels, that are really against how drum corps-ified marching band has become and how much of a focus it's become in a lot of schools.
Yeah.
And I tend to agree that it's become like a little bit much. But I also like my own fondness for being in marching band and doing that. Like I think it's an important thing to keep around.
Yeah. Well, and at Eastman, there was, it felt like at times there was a pretty strong culture against marching band.
Hmm.
There was no football team at Eastman, obviously, like there are at some bigger schools,
Yeah.
and so a lot of people didn't really have a lot of time for that, or didn't really have a lot of respect for it. But then on the other hand, there were students who had a really strong marching background that were clearly excellent players, and clearly had their act together a little bit more than others.
Hmm.
And sometimes I think they were sort of hiding their past, like it wasn't something you made a real big deal out of, like, okay, yeah, I was in the Cavaliers or
Yeah.
whatever. And to me, having been in marching band and watched the videos of the Cavaliers, but I never even had a dream of being actually in something like that. When I found that out that was true, I couldn't believe it. One of my best friends was in the bass drum line of the Cadets, and like when I found that out, I was like, oh my God, it's like meeting somebody that's on the Yankees or something. You know, I thought it was really incredible.
Yeah.
Just because I never imagined it for me, you know, and so I think that was, you know, there's a lot of good. Yeah, like you said, there's a lot of good to it, but I don't know. It was just, it took me a while to realize it.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of thinking about it, and it takes like you have to really understand the process. And well, a lot of the academic things I think that are against it, like it's a lot of higher level performing teachers that are going, oh, that's ruining trumpet embouchures, or that's ruining stick heights for my percussionists, stuff like that.
Right.
Where it's like, you know, maybe it's creating a fixable problem, but it's developing so many other things while you're working on that it's worth it, I think.
Yeah. And like a lot of things, there's probably good and bad examples of that, you
Yeah.
know, even within my understanding of DCI cores and stuff, there are some that promote really healthy things and some that promote less healthy things, or, you know, emphasis that are in different places. So, you know, it's hard to make a general statement about it, I guess.
Hmm. You mentioned that you had private teachers.
Mhm.
So you started with the Suzuki method. When after that did you start, like on percussion teaching, I guess?
So I think I probably played violin into maybe like second or third grade or something like that.
Okay.
And then for us, the school program started in third grade for band, percussion, that stuff. So I think I don't know how long in between there, but it was pretty quick. And, you know, my mom had drums at home, so I'd play a little bit here and there.
Okay.
You know, I knew a little bit of what I was doing, but yeah, I started in third grade. Not so many schools up here start in third grade anymore. More it's like fourth grade, but some fifth grade.
Yeah,
But
we
I
tend to
started,
start in fourth or fifth here
yeah,
too.
I started in third, and I played. You know, I played in the band and did my school band assignments. But I think for a while I was kind of just like everybody else, you know, and sometimes I would practice and sometimes I wouldn't. But I was better at it, I think, just because of my background. I was able to get by without putting in as
Right.
much work. And so I think it was like seventh grade that I started studying with Jack with the Philharmonic, working on more mallets and that kind of stuff, you know.
Hmm.
And I did that, I would say probably 2-3 years or something until he moved. And then I didn't have a teacher again. Early high school, I was kind of just on my own figuring stuff out. My band teacher at school was helpful, you know, in some ways. And then it was a kind of middle of 10th grade that I started with Rich on the drum set stuff.
Okay. Yes. Do you think having access to private instruction like that really influenced you on your not only like your decision to become a professional musician, but your ability to get into the college that you went to, into Eastern?
Yeah, definitely. You know, I wasn't a great student for a lot of that time, and
Hmm.
I think you could argue that I wasn't a great student for the entire time. You know, there were just always things that I remember, especially thinking back to the early middle school lessons. You know, I would go in and I had been used to kind of faking it in elementary school at my school band lessons, and I could do that because there were 5 other kids there, and they were, you know, varying levels of success. So
Yeah.
I wasn't, at least I was never the worst of the problem, you know. And so I got by okay with that stuff, and would do like all county and stuff like that. And,
Yeah.
you know, my mom could help me a little bit or whatever, and I got pretty far with that stuff. But then when I was studying with the guy from the Philharmonic, I would go in same thing, you know, okay, well, I didn't really work on this week, but it should be fine. And it like wasn't fine at all, of course.
Yeah.
And it would be brutal, you know, like, because there was nowhere to go, there was no escape.
Right.
And a lot of times there was no, like, he had a lot of patience with me, I remember. So a lot of times there would be, you know, it would just be like, okay, well, I guess keep trying until you get it. And boy, I would get so frustrated, and I couldn't get it. You know, a lot of times I would say, oh, well, maybe I need some more time on this. I say, well, you know, we're here now, so let's try. And oh boy, so I feel embarrassed to think back to those. But I learned a lot from those lessons. I think at least I learned, I saw a good example of someone whose job was to be a musician, you know. And my dad, before he became a teacher, he had done a lot of work as a professional bass player. He was played on some studio dates in LA for a number of years and had a band that did really well for a bit of time. So I saw that, but it's your dad, so you know, it's like kind of still was my dad. But I saw another person now whose job was to be like, his job was to practice, and his job was to get really good at music. So, and his wife was also in the orchestra in the violin section. So, you know, there were two people whose like their whole job was just to do music. So
Yeah.
I think just seeing that was a encouraging moment, and seeing how good he was at everything. You know, I think I took that away. And then after that sort of, you know, fell apart, and I looked at Rich, and you know, Rich was teaching at Eastman already, and I knew from my dad, you know, he just always would tell me Eastman is the best, and Eastman is the mecca of music, and that's where you should want to end up if you're good at it, if you want to be good at it. And so I'm sure like the relationship with Rich probably helped get into the school. I don't know. I mean, I have no idea how many people, you know, the auditions or how good they were or whatever. But you know, being able to talk through the audition with him at a lesson, I'm sure had an influence on getting into the school. Um, but I think, you know, beyond that, just having access to someone who was a real expert in both of those cases helped me a lot.
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate. And I think not only those particular teachers, you know, like my dad knowing those folks through his network of professional musicians really helped a lot. You know, it wasn't just some random guy. Like, not a lot of people that are in seventh grade can study with the principal player in the Philharmonic, you know,
Right.
and then
Exactly.
move on to a professor at one of the top conservatories. So, you know, I think that there was a lot of luck that was involved there. So yeah, for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I asked the question not to, like, you know, accuse you of, like, you know, this is you've gotten
It's
everything
okay.
handed to you or anything.
No, it's
But
okay.
I wonder how we can try to equalize that in places where there's, I guess, a drought of experienced musicians to teach some of these kids that want to get into this.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to sound old, but you know, one of the things that's changed a great deal is just the access that people have to information on the internet.
Hmm.
Because when I was, I'm going to turn 37 on Saturday, and so
Wow.
we had the internet, you know, when I was in middle school, but a pretty rudimentary form of it, and it certainly didn't have the kinds of things that it has now. You know, in terms of, and especially during COVID stuff, you know, you see so many people posting virtual master classes and online symposiums, and I think it's fantastic. It's really, really a great thing. And distance lessons, you know, like I see people doing Skype lessons even before this whole thing happened,
Hmm.
which I think is awesome. So I think that's kind of good, you know, in that I think we've got a little more opportunity. I think money obviously still stands in the way, and the means to get to some of those things. But I often will say in my own, you know, my own teaching now, if I don't know something, you know, about how to play this oboe fingering or about the trombone or whatever, I mean, I have somebody right on speed dial that I can FaceTime and talk to
Right.
about it right away, or, you know, with the student maybe even. And so that helps a lot. You know, I think that we've come a long way. I think the other thing that's changed a lot is I think that the overall level is higher too, of the students that are getting into music programs. You know, like when I look um, at like the crop of freshmen that get into Eastman each year, they're like
Hmm.
really, really outstanding players, and probably better than what we were when we started as freshmen. Probably a lot of having to do with some of these things, you know, just the access. I mean, even to listen to music. I mean, when I wanted to listen to a CD of a great drummer, I had to go try to find it at Media Play. That was the store we had in my town.
Right.
And they were pretty light on their jazz selection, you know. And I remember when Amazon first came out, and I was in high school, and the first time I remember using Amazon to buy a book. And you know, now like if you pay $10 a month to Spotify, you can listen to pretty much anything in the history of music. So I think that's a really, really fantastic development. Obviously, we've got to make sure we use it that way. But the other side of the coin is good to think about too, because when I had, 2 jazz CDs, then I really, really listened to them and knew them
Mm-hmm.
intimately. And I can think about the first couple that I listened to. Kind of Blue, I think, which is pretty classic, and Jimmy Cobb is the drummer on that, just passed away this week.
Wow.
So that's pretty big. And I had this Elvin Jones record called Dear John C, which I don't even know is necessarily like the best example of his playing, but I remember it so clearly and know every measure of it. I could sing
Yeah.
it back to you because that's what I had. I remember going to my first time I went to a camp. I went to the Skidmore Jazz Institute at summer of 10th grade, and I took 2 cassettes. Like that's what I had, So I had dubbed a couple CDs onto these long play cassettes, and I could listen to Miles Davis 4 and More, or Christian McBride record. And I remember them so clearly. I'm sitting here talking to you 20 years later because of how deeply I was able to study them, because I was limited in my material, So I think that's maybe the other side of it, is there's so much out there, but
Mm-hmm.
who knows if you're clicking on this looks like a cool master class or whatever. I mean, we don't know necessarily who the people are or the quality of it. So I don't know. I think that one of the things that's great is the access, but
Yeah.
if somebody's not there, the teacher is still necessary, somebody to curate that access and guide you with what books to use and that sort of stuff, I think still matters a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I definitely I think the amount of resources has changed a lot even since I was in high school. I graduated in 2011, so we had wide access to the internet and Google and all that, but we didn't have smartphones quite as prevalent at that point.
Yep.
And so just the idea, when I was a senior, the idea that I could just pull out my phone and Google something immediately was brand new.
Mm-hmm.
And to have that now is really nice. But we have a lot of teachers who didn't grow up around that, and they're not fluent in discerning what's good content to share with their students and what's not.
Right.
So I definitely think that a push to online, but curated push with people that know what they're doing is very important.
Yeah, I mean, the ability to record, I was just looking here, I thought I had it, but I guess I don't. But when I was in college, we had to use a mini disc recorder to record concerts and stuff. We
Wow.
would go. Have you ever seen one of those?
No.
They're about half the size of an iPhone. I wish I could find it. It's got it sitting right here somewhere. They're half the size of an iPhone,
Uh-huh.
and they take a disc that looks kind of like an old computer disc, like a square,
Uh-huh.
and they were portable enough that we could sneak them into a show that we were seeing with a microphone attached. So you kind of have to put it into your coat, or whatever,
Uh-huh.
and then you could record it. But now, with your phone, I mean, I can make a recording from my watch right now if I wanted to. It's so easy.
Yeah.
Or the same thing, we used to have in the Sibley Library at Eastman is one of the biggest music libraries in the world, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But you couldn't take CDs out. You could only listen to the media in the library.
Right.
And so my friend and I had developed this scheme where we bought a CD duplicator on eBay for $100 or something like that. And it was this huge, box, as big as a loaf of bread or something.
Right.
That we would sneak it into the library, and then one of us would sort of stand guard while the other one would burn a CD that we wanted. And it took, probably 8 to 10 minutes to copy a CD. And, then made this loud noise, and anybody that was in there would hear this weird, space shuttle taking off noise. But that's what we did in order to get this music, to study it, because we were in college. We couldn't afford to buy CDs and stuff like that at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So, just having the access to it is so different now in the way that you can use your phone to record or take a video of yourself and send it to someone else. Or, that's one of the things I think as a teacher that can be really frustrating is that, again, not to sound like the old man here, but like if the kids knew like back in my day what you had to go through in order to do these things and how easy it is now, I think that the appreciation would be a little different. And I see that and I'm like, that's so frustrating that we
Yeah.
can't take advantage of that stuff on a regular basis. But there's a lot more there about culture and a lot deeper conversation you can have.
Definitely.
Might be better for another episode.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about your undergrad. Did you feel it prepared you very well for being a classroom music educator?
Not a lot. Not really.
Okay.
So because here was the thing, like, and I think Eastman's great. I still maintain that Eastman is the greatest, and I think everyone probably thinks that about their own alma mater. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying anything to necessarily say it was horrible, but the thing that was hard about the education program was that there was very much one right way of doing things, I think, in their mind. And if you didn't do it that way, then you never learned about any of the alternatives, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like the method that we used was the Gordon method, like a very ear-based, aural-based method, which I've seen like fantastic examples of that working. But I've also seen a lot of examples of it being really difficult to use for either students or for teachers, or depending on the fit in the school district, or a lot of reasons, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember like never really learning, for example, how to do anything about classroom management. And we would ask, we say like, well, what if the kids are bad, or what if the kid tells you to shut up, or what should you do? And a lot of times the answer we would get was like, well, they won't do that if they're engaged in what they're doing. And I was like, that's totally false. Like, that isn't true at all.
Yeah.
I needed to learn, like if I have a class of 20 kids and they're all just going nuts, like what do I do? And I had to learn it by doing it and trying stuff out, which I don't feel like was the best use of anyone's time, so to speak. And I also think we were pretty weak on secondary instruments. So
Okay.
like I was really good at the drums, but I was able to like I didn't want to play the flute, and so I was able to sort of take this path through the course selections where I never actually took flute class. So I didn't know how to play the flute at all. At all. I still barely do.
Yeah.
I mean, I figured it out, I've practiced it, and I've taken some lessons and that sort of thing. But I really, when I graduated, I probably couldn't have even told you how to put your fingers on the keys. I mean, really. And that seems like a big problem to me now as someone who interviews teachers for jobs and stuff.
Yeah.
I would have hoped to have known a little bit about everything. And it was my own fault. It was my own stupid fault as a 20-year-old in school. But I also needed somebody to say, like, hey, you need to do this. So somebody I wish would have had my back there. Then I look at somebody like my wife, who's much smarter than I am and much more prepared. And she was smart about it. She was in Eastman at the same time as me,
Mm-hmm.
as a voice music ed student. And I'm sure she took every class and then some. That was her way. And for her, it worked out great. Now she's a brilliant teacher and does an amazing job. But I kind of looked for the easy way, and I was doing this double major too. So I was doing a jazz drum set major along with music ed.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I never really got I never felt totally at home in the jazz department because I was also doing this other thing, and I felt like the music ed people felt like I wasn't focusing on what they wanted me to enough. In the end, I think it was perfect for me. It worked out, and made me into what I am today. But I didn't feel like that was a super helpful start. I learned a lot more from watching my high school band teachers and asking them questions. And later in my college time, I started to teach the marching band back at my old high school.
Mm-hmm.
I learned, I think, a lot more about just how to talk to somebody and how to get your students to pay attention to you and how to do some of those basic things. So I guess I can blame myself because I didn't really realize what I needed to be doing in that case. But
Sure.
I'm shocked that there was a loophole that allowed me out of some of that. I think there were some things
Yeah.
that we needed to address. You know, I think another one, like I think back to my conducting courses, and I don't remember ever learning about like score study. You know, now maybe they talked about it and I didn't pay attention or I wasn't there that day or something.
Hmm.
But I remember like a couple years ago, because I didn't always teach band, right? I taught like some general music stuff for some
Sure.
years. So I remember my first year teaching high school band, which was like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that. And we were at this honor band thing where we have 4 high schools, so each of the conductors was going to conduct one piece at the honor band of our district. And I remember one of the people saying, "Oh yeah, I needed to do a little bit more score study." And I felt embarrassed. I was like, "What do you mean? Like, can you tell me what you're gonna do? Because I don't, like, I know how the song goes, so I should be good." And like, looking back on that moment, there's so much more to it than that, right? But
Right.
I never really got that. Maybe I missed something, or I don't know. I guess I always went through undergrad feeling like, did I miss a day that I like should know what's going on more, and I
Yeah.
don't.
I think that's one of those things that gets swept under the rug. We talked about it in my conducting courses, I think, very lightly. And it was just like maybe we talked about it for like our professor like shared a textbook and we had to like talk about something.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't much beyond that. And I think after that, at Cal State Fullerton, we have a class called Practicum, which is like the last music ed class that you have to take before you go into the credential program.
Yeah.
And we had a project where we had to like fill out a score with like, marking really big, like trumpet entrance here and stuff like that. So we like got some fundamentals, but even to this day, like one of my professors said she like used to spend like 2 hours a week doing score study. And if I think about trying to do that right now, I don't have enough tools to like spend that kind of time.
Right. That's a good point. Not only is time a factor, but also like what you would do for that time. Yeah. I think
Yep.
I had a student teacher from Ithaca College, which is close by to us, and they had a whole system for score study that used different colors and
Mm-hmm.
marking different arrows for dynamics and tempo, and using very very specific. And a lot of times, maybe you feel the same way. For me, a lot of times, I learn what I don't know by seeing what other people do know. And so when I watched the student teacher mark the score like crazy, I was like, wow, yeah, that's great. I also said to him, like, you're probably not going to have time to do that in real
Yeah.
life much.
Yeah.
But having the idea at least makes sense. I got this book. This might be the one you're talking about, this guide to score study, right? Have you seen this guy?
Yeah, I think it might be that book.
That's pretty great, and I think there's a lot of good advice in there about, if you, I forgot exactly what he says, but if it's, like every minute of the piece should be 2 hours of study or something to that effect. And yeah, like it's hard to think about having the time for that in real life. There's a conductor teacher at a local college here who a lot of times will talk about that. Like, he blocks off half the morning on Monday for score study. I'm like, that's awesome that's how your job works. That's not how my job works at
Yeah.
all. But that's cool, like that's great. And he certainly knows the music really, really well. So I think that's cool. But that was just one of the things. And I think I talk about this a lot with my friend Ivan, who's a percussion composer, Ivan Trevino, and he talks a lot about like how so many music schools are pretty broken in the way that they do things. It's just like it's always been this way, and this is how we've always done it. And there's not a lot of innovation. And so he talks a lot about different things that he would do and programs that he would completely throw out the window in lieu of some other things that are maybe more important today. Again, that's like another humongous topic
Mm-hmm.
that you could devote entire books about. Um, but I think that one of the things that's important that I say here is that while I felt like there were some of these things that I didn't get out of Eastman, I know for sure that one of the biggest things I did get was that we all had really high standards for everything. And I used to talk about it with some of my friends. Um, I remember one day we went to observe at a school, and there was a group from another college that was also observing at the same school the same morning.
Mm-hmm.
And we all walked in dressed really nicely and, ready to go and taking notes. And we looked at the kids from the other school, and they were wearing what they probably wore on campus and not really taking notes. And you could tell there was just a different level of seriousness that we had going on.
Sure.
And I think that's one of the things that I learned. That was kind of the way. And knowing to go into a situation only being completely prepared. Like there was no other solution at Eastman than going into it. Like you show up for a rehearsal on the first rehearsal, not knowing your part. I mean, it wasn't something that was acceptable for us.
Right.
That was the culture of the place. You couldn't go into a wind ensemble rehearsal and figure it out while you're sitting there. That wasn't what it was about. And I think that's probably exists a lot of places. But for me, that was what I mostly took out of it, that and the network of folks that I know.
Mm-hmm.
Because now the network of people that were in my classmates is, crazy, the list of things that they're doing now. And, we could go through a huge long list. I was laughing with my wife yesterday because there was a video that the Army Field Band put out for instrument recruiting,
Mm-hmm.
And it was one from each instrument. And I was laughing with Sarah because the whole first row, 6 or 7 people were all people from our class at Eastman.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like, here's this video, and and it's not to boast or anything like that, but it's just there's a really great network of people that were my friends and still are my friends, and that's pretty cool. That's something that I think is really valuable to me. So it wasn't all bad.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm not. I think I'm trying to highlight, and I ask this question a lot of people, but I want to highlight that I think there are a lot of failures as far on the music education aspect of things, especially to just to like develop people not only into good performers but into like really excellent teachers who know what they're doing in the classroom all the time.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense if you think about it, because take, for example, someone going to school to be an English teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Like all they're doing is learning about how to be a teacher.
Yeah.
In music school, you're also spending a huge portion of your time learning how to be a musician at the same time as you're learning how to be a teacher. And I think that's where you see a lot of times at schools like at Eastman, at least when I was there, to do music ed kind of felt like it was a lesser endeavor at some times, because here's this person's going to go take a New York Phil audition, and like that's pretty great,
Yeah.
and then I'm going to go teach at this like elementary school, which doesn't seem as glamorous, I suppose. And I think that part of it is because of that, because then it felt like if you were only focusing on the music ed portion of the thing, it felt like you were focusing on half the amount of work.
Yeah.
And so I've learned a lot, from colleagues that teach other subjects, just like watching how the English teacher does things, and watching how the technology teacher does things. Like they're just focusing on education primarily in those programs, as far as I can tell.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's a hard thing. But like, I think if you're not a great musician, I don't think you could be you can be as great a music teacher either. Like if you're not a great player, it's hard to provide a good example, and it's hard to know. I can stand in front of my kids, and like, I can't imagine a scenario where my school band is going to ever play better than the best group I've played in.
Right. Yeah. I mean, regardless of how good of a teacher you are. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's very, very important. So no matter whether I'm, working with an all district band or something like that, definitely I've played in better groups
mm-hmm.
by nature of where I've been and what I've done, So I think that's a huge, huge value of that. So yeah, there are things that, that we need to change in the education world. I think I also always just knew where I stood, which was good. So
mm-hmm.
like I knew whether, like if I didn't know something, at least I knew I didn't know. At least could tell something about my perception that I developed in school helped me to know, like, okay, I know this isn't a good try on the trumpet, for example. I know I
Right.
don't sound good, but at least I know. And that's something I think that people miss sometimes too. It's like, well, oh yeah, I'm really good at all my secondary instruments compared to who, like
Right.
I sat next to, my roommate in freshman year was an amazing trombone player. Like, I guess I sounded okay on trombone, but like he was really good, So I think
Hmm.
there's that part of it too that helped. So yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of room for change for sure. I'm excited to see places that are making that change.
Yeah, me too. You mentioned, and I'm just out of curiosity, you mentioned the that you managed to not play flute. Did you guys have for secondary instruments? Did you have like a class for every instrument, or did you have like a woodwind methods and a brass methods and a percussion methods?
Yeah, I mean, one existed for every instrument.
Okay.
I feel like the way that it was, and I could be wrong. This was a while ago, but at the time, it was like you had to take one of the instruments would be like a half year course that met maybe like once or twice a week.
Hmm.
And so that was like, I did clarinet for that one and trumpet. You had to do like one woodwind and one brass that were like kind of the gateway, I guess, instrument. And then you had to take maybe two others that were sort of, the next more auxiliary, I suppose. So like I remember I took trumpet and then I took horn and trombone for half that time. Half the amount of time I took trumpet, right? So
Wow.
like maybe 1 year. So I took half a year of trumpet and then a quarter trombone and a quarter of horn. And then the same was true for woodwind. So I took clarinet for half a year, only once or twice a week though.
Okay.
And then I took oboe. Um,
That's pretty simple.
I got kicked out of the oboe class for making too many jokes. And then saxophone, I think. I don't really remember so well, but I think that's right. So I never took bassoon. And I never took uh, tuba, and I think they just expected like, well, tuba and trumpet are the same fingerings pretty much. So, like that'll get
Yeah.
you there and you'll know how to figure. I don't know. And I don't know why it was like that. I don't know if it's still like that. It's been a long time, truthfully, since I've checked
Yeah.
out what that program's like now. But I guess you just knew how to get better at it if you wanted to, or maybe student teaching was supposed to be some of that. But in my student teaching, my high school student teaching, the school's band played at such a high level that there was almost no need for demonstration. Like any
Yeah.
demonstration I could have done would have made things worse, not better, right?
Hmm.
And so I think that was true of my cooperating teachers too. At the elementary level, it was just, when I started, it was the beginning of the school year, so they didn't get very far, and I could hang in there at least like the first three notes, and
Yeah.
then I was gone. I left, in mid October or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe there were better ways that could have worked out, but I definitely can think of several jobs that I interviewed for that I didn't get solely based on the fact that I couldn't play the flute, you know. And so that my life might have been in a real different place if I would have learned how to do that.
Yeah. I
So I don't
mean,
know.
the flute itself, I do feel like is like one of the hardest. Like it's one of the hardest woodwinds to start on, and like really get your fingers wrapped around. And that was one that like I managed to avoid like picking up a flute or a saxophone until I was in college.
Yeah.
And I remember my semester of woodwind methods, and I had to play the flute, and I was so frustrated with it. But like,
Hmm.
thank God I did that, because when I went to student teaching and when I went to get the job that I have now, like,
Yeah.
it wasn't required for the interview, but like, I would have felt totally useless trying to teach beginners.
Yeah. Well, and I remember like this. I reminisce about this a lot with some of my friends.
Hmm.
We were in conducting class, and the final project for conducting was that everyone had to write an arrangement of something and then conduct it. And I was friends with my three close pals who were all percussion guys. And so I remember being in that conducting class, and having to sign up for what you would play in the lab ensemble when we demoed everybody's compositions. And so I don't remember exactly why, but I was first of my friends to sign up, and I thought for some reason you had to pick a different instrument than your primary instrument, because some people were doing that. So I said I could do horn, and I had taken the horn class. That was it. Like, I didn't know much of what I was doing, and to go back to like I said before, I wasn't a real great student, so I didn't do a lot of extra practicing on the horn or anything like I should have. And then all my other friends just chose percussion, which is what they played. And so we got to the day, and I had to see it through, and I got out my horn, and I had a fingering chart there, I remember. And the first two pieces both had these like really hard horn parts, like super challenging that I couldn't even come close on.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Dr. Scatterday came back, and he just put his hand on my shoulder, and he's like, "Why don't you go ahead and put that away, bud?" And I was like, "Oh man!" And that was it, And like nobody else had horn on their piece, and it was a mess. And I mean, that was embarrassing on a lot of levels. But I should have known how to do it by then, at least how to keep up in a group like that. So when I taught, I did a year of elementary band, and I made a real point to try to really practice a lot during that year when I had time. And so I got to the point where now I feel like I'm adequate on most of those instruments, but could have gone better. Some of those moments didn't need to happen necessarily.
Right.
So yeah.
Good. Okay. And so now to move on to your master's. What is your master's in again?
So my master's is just in jazz and contemporary media. That's what we call it at Eastman. Drum set, jazz drum set, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. And just like out of curiosity, what like value do you like attribute to having that? Like what do you feel it adds to you now?
Yeah, so I did that because there were a couple of reasons I did it. I was already teaching part-time in that job that I had mentioned, so I couldn't I didn't really think I could go back to school full-time, but I had to stay certified. And so that particular program, it was gonna work like with my schedule. Like most of the stuff for the jazz degree happened in the afternoon, and most of the teaching that I was doing happened in the morning. So convenience was one, and I knew it would be easier, honestly, too, because they're just the course requirements. There were fewer of them, so there was more room for electives, and there was more room for kind of me to make my own way, sort of. I did a few independent studies and stuff that I thought were useful.
Yeah.
A couple classes that met at night. So just the ease of getting it was one, at least initially. And I still really consider myself to be, equal parts teacher and musician for sure. Like I do a lot of playing still around. Well, when playing live music was a thing. So that's still a really important part of who I am.
Yeah.
And I love it, and I also probably knew that I wasn't good enough to like, if I had auditioned for a percussion program at Eastman, there's no chance I would have been accepted. Like I just, don't have those skills, or didn't have those skills at that point, or anywhere else for that matter. So that was kind of what I was good at, what I could do. And I didn't really, like you can tell by now, I didn't love the education program the first time through. And a lot of it was like repeat classes or overlapping. Like when I did my undergrad, there were master students in some of my classes. So I kind of felt like I'd already done that.
Yeah.
And surely there were other things that I could have taken, but that was my mindset at the time, at least. And so, I did the jazz degree, and from a musical perspective, or as an artist, I came back to it, and it was 3 years after I graduated from my undergrad too. I let some time pass. And so I came back to it, and I felt much more like an adult at that point. I had, gotten my life together to the point where I could, have an apartment and have, a girlfriend at the time and a job. And, I felt like I kind of had just regular life sort of figured out, which looking back on it, wow, is totally not true. But, so as a jazz drummer, as an improviser, I had a lot more confidence that my own personal ideas were going to be solid and strong. I had kind of started to find my own voice, so to speak. And the same thing is true as a composer. I had written a lot of music that eventually became an album that I released in 2011.
Mhm.
And so, that part of it, I had developed a lot of that. I just had some time to screw up, I guess, and explore and experiment with things. Um, and I think in my current world as a teacher, I mean, definitely teaching jazz ensemble is something that was always really comfortable for me, and so I think it helped with that for sure.
Mhm.
Um, but the skills that I learned as a player in the jazz department were different skills than some of my friends have learned. Like I play once a year with my percussion friends. We meet up at one of our friends' schools and put on this day of percussion. It's like a 2-day event where we do master classes and play chamber music and stuff. And all the rest of the friends were classical players, classical majors.
Uh-huh.
So I always feel like, I've got the worst skills in the group of friends in terms of playing the marimba or something. But
Sure.
everybody will tell you that I'm the best chamber music participant in terms of like feeling a tempo together or like grooving with somebody, because that's sort of like what I focused on the most in my
Yeah.
master's program. I like playing with a bass player and learning how that relationship works. So I think there were real pros and cons. Um, and looking back on that and now looking at stuff that's out there, like if I had to go get a master's degree right now, I might look at a program where they're, having like conducting, like a conducting major or something like that. But for me at the time, that wasn't right.
Yeah.
Like I just had 2 jazz bands that I had. I didn't even have a concert band at the time. So that didn't
Okay.
make any sense to me.
Yeah.
And I was a pretty poor life planner. So I was just like, let me do what I need to do right now. The thing I needed to do is get a degree.
Mhm.
But the things that came out of that, like, again, were so rich, like my relationships with people that I know, and the network of people that I am able to tap into expanded a great deal. I was able to do things that not a lot of people have ever done. Like, because I was in the jazz department, I worked with this composer named Jen Beller, and she was a mostly classical composer, but she was trying to write some music for jazz. And so we worked together on some pieces that she wrote, and that was cool. And then she wrote a concerto for drum set and wind ensemble that I played with the Eastman Wind Ensemble. It was like pretty amazing experience
Yeah.
that most people won't get. But I kind of filled this weird hybrid where I was like, I kind of lived in both of those worlds a little bit. And then she went on, she wrote a piece then for jazz quintet and wind ensemble that we played with the Eastman Wind Ensemble the next year.
Mhm.
And so like that's really a cool thing. I got to have that opportunity. I got to play with Maria Schneider's band on a couple tunes when they came to visit. They needed a cajon player, so my friend and I played cajon on this piece. Got to do some really cool things like that, that I wouldn't have been able to do if it weren't for that. And those sort of added up to be who I am. So when my students, we talk about, I just have these very vast experiences that I can say to my students, like, oh yeah, I did this thing, or I did this thing, or oh yeah, when we did this, and they're like, man, every person, or you've done all the stuff, and
Yeah.
I think that lends me a lot of credibility, that I've kind of been out in the real world. I'm a real musician that has done some things. I have a record out. I've played on some other albums that they can go listen to on iTunes or whatever. And for me, and I realize my situation is unique, but for me, that gets me a lot more mileage with my students than knowing, having a really outstanding baton technique, or, like some very advanced rehearsal technique or something, because my students are not in a place in their skill development where that's what they need. What they need is like a really strong relationship and a really good example. And so I think through what I've done, it's kind of the perfect marriage, for me and my
Mhm.
students of what they need out of someone in my position. So, there are many, many different paths that people might take and different ways that it could go. But for me, that's what worked. And so, and if I try to convince myself otherwise, then it gets really dark. So I just tell myself I did the right thing.
I
That's
mean,
all.
it from what I'm hearing, it sounds like you really made the right choice, and I definitely agree that at least in my own case as well, my students, like, you get a whole lot of mileage when you're good at what you're doing. If you can show them that, like, you can pick up your horn and, like, just blow blow them out of the water,
Mhm.
just like as an example, they go like, oh my gosh. Like, I remember my first year of teaching, I picked up my horn and they were like, what, you have like a speaker in there or something? Like, they thought I was pretending, but like, it's amazing the amount of power that you have when you're good at it.
Yeah, I remember my first day of student teaching. I knew my cooperating teacher. We knew each other a little bit, and he had me sit down with the jazz band and play, something, the first chart they were working on.
Mhm.
And I just did my thing. Like, that's what I did. And he said later, he's like, that's what you got to do. You got to just show them right off the bat who's boss. And like, they knew from that point. They didn't know whether I couldn't play flute or not, but they knew that I could play the drums really well, and and then that made them listen to what I had to say. I
Right.
think that's a good one. Just being a good example. And I don't, try to make a big deal out of it or whatever. And I really try hard to not sit down in the jazz band and play as an example all that often. I don't think that's really fair to my
Yeah.
students. It's not, we're not at the same level. That's the point. But they know, everybody knows, and they can see the poster on my door of this concert that I played, or the here's an album that I'm on, or whatever. That's enough. I think that just
Yeah.
sort of lets them know, like, yeah, this guy knows what he's talking about. Whether I do or not is another question. It's good that they think that.
Yeah. Okay. So you're teaching at what levels right now?
Yeah, so I teach. About half of my job is to teach high school band, and then
Okay.
the other half is to be the coordinator for the district.
Okay.
So my high school band, right now I just have one band, wind ensemble, and then one jazz band.
Hmm.
And at our school, that's all there is for high school. And then we have a middle school that has 7th and 8th grade band and 6th grade band and the middle school jazz ensemble. And then there's orchestras and choirs too. So
Wow.
I just do the high school band and the jazz band, and then like a few lessons. Like, I usually teach
Okay.
the percussionists, and then the rest of it will fall to a colleague to do the rest of the lessons and stuff.
Right.
And then my administrative work is very varied. We've got a lot of things that we've tried to change in our district over the last couple of years. So a lot of it is just like coming up with new policies for things, and then creating forms that match those policies, or
Right.
just sort of like administrative stuff that is it's just really different. I don't know, very different job. So primarily, when I'm with kids, it's high school band.
Okay. Um, when let's say you have like a senior, and that senior wants to be a music major, what do you want them to know before they graduate?
Well, if they want to be a music major, I think that one conversation that we always have is just kind of a reality conversation. And it's like to say, if this is something you want to do, you have to be really good at
Yeah.
it. You can't just be like kind of, I mean, you could, I suppose, but you're going to be a lot better served if you're very good at this. And we talk a lot, whether it's about music or whether it's about something else that students are interested in. The biggest thing I want all my students to take away is that I want them to know how to become really excellent at something.
Mm-hmm.
So we find that skill through music, but that skill could be anything. Whatever you're going to do, I want them to be able to be really great at it. So if they want to work in real estate, I hope that they're not just an okay real estate salesperson. I hope that they're the best. And if they want to be, go to the police academy, I hope that they're the top graduate, not just a graduate.
Right.
That was something, like I said, that I think at Eastman we thought about a lot, just like trying to be the best at it. And you may not always achieve that, but I think with that mindset, you get yourself a lot further than trying to get through by the skin of your teeth, like I often did.
Right.
So that's one thing. I think also we talk a ton about the idea of just being empathetic and being a citizen of the world that tries to understand, how things work. I don't mean to make it sound like I teach in a horrible place. I don't. I teach in a really great community, but a lot of times the feelings of others are not like the top priority of my students. And so we try to talk a lot about just like, you know, through music, how can we create healing in times when that's needed? And through music, how can we learn to express ourselves in a variety of ways? We talk a lot about the idea that our job as performers is just to create emotions and experiences for the people listening to our music.
Mm-hmm.
The composers have given us these great blueprints for how to do that. So we have to figure out how to deliver the moment to the audience. So I think those are all skills that are really transferable. I think if I was preparing a student for a music program, then making sure like that all foundation is strong and making sure they have a good understanding of music theory, making sure that they have a good understanding of how their instrument works and that they've listened to a lot of different music and that they've experienced all different kinds of music in large quantities.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big one. My students are lucky because there's the jazz radio station in Rochester is actually in our library. It just is a public service of the school to host this radio station. So,
Uh-huh.
but it's an amazing radio station, like top 10 jazz radio station in America. And so we have our own show once a month where we go and the kids pick out the music and then they have to be able to talk about it and just say enough so that they can be a DJ for 3 minutes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The jazz band does that. And that skill I think is just being a critical listener or being somebody who can it's kind of a tired trope at this point, but to be a consumer of music and someone who will try to go to hear a concert. If the Philharmonic plays a free concert at your church, will you go with your family and realize the value there? So I think those are some things we try to get everybody doing. um, you know for me, looking back on it, I think the stronger my piano skills were, the better I would have done. Um, you know, a little bit of singing would have helped probably. That's not something I
Yeah.
really ever did. Um, I never, as a percussionist, I still struggle a lot with intonation, and I don't. So it was never something I had to worry about for a long
Mm-hmm.
time. Hitting F would give me an F for many, many years. And so now, trying to think about how to teach that as well as recognize it in my rehearsals. That would have been, ear training would have been something that I would have focused a lot more on. But I think that, ultimately being a good person and being somebody that, people like to have around is as good a skill as any and as hard a skill to master as any. And so that's what I hope, most importantly, is that if I send a student anywhere, that those things that are important to me on a day-to-day basis come through as important to them as well, so that they see, folks can see that this person, I the best compliment if a guest conductor comes in or something is like that the kids are, you can tell they really like being there and that they want to get better. That's to me the best compliment. That they're really. I don't care as much if you say, "Wow, like what amazing technique," or that sort of stuff is cool, but it's like secondary to just you know the the ethos that we're in when we have our rehearsals and our
Right.
hallway
The
interactions and stuff. That stuff matters so much.
Yeah, the community that they are, right?
Yeah,
The what citizens.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, I can think of so many examples where like teachers I know or musicians I've played with or whatever that had, all the skills but that one. And it's just such an unpleasant moment.
Hmm.
It's not fun to participate in that experience. Doesn't matter, how great it is. If the vibe right before and right after the tune is not good, then almost no experience while playing can erase that.
Right.
But I've
Hmm.
played a lot of music, and been in a lot of situations with folks that were really kind and open and warm and giving, that, you know, it's okay if it's not the most amazing killing playing, you know, it's like, this is a great person to be with. And, you know,
Mhm.
even if you think about being on tour with a band or something like that, like the amount of time that you're not playing compared to the amount of time you are playing is so disproportionate.
Yeah.
Like I'll sacrifice the, you know, whatever it is amount of music sometimes for a great friend, you know, or a great person. So
Yeah.
we're working towards that, but I think that's what I would say to anyone. And it's hard advice, you know, because I think everyone thinks they're that way, but you know,
Yeah.
not necessarily.
What do you do currently to like address citizenship? Like not necessarily issues, but to have everyone be good citizens in within the band community.
I mean, I think number one is modeling it.
Hmm.
For me, you know, I really my affect is such that I'm way more like the disappointed dad than I am like the yelling dad at school. I think
Hmm.
at home it's different sometimes, but my kids are 5 and 3, so I think it's a little different in
Yeah.
that there. But I look at myself and my peers, and I think modeling that sort of thing is really important. You know, with the world being such a divided place right now, politically and other things, I think that just, you know, being someone who's open to conversations about all kinds of things and letting my students know that I care about them, I think, like, it's like, are you allowed to swear on your podcast?
Sure.
Okay. So like I had this student once, my first year at my school that I'm at now, and we were in the jazz band, and she was playing first alto sax, really, you know, good musician, good player,
Hmm.
and someone who I really liked a lot. And she was having a bad day or whatever, for whatever reason, whatever was going on, and kids were on her case and whatever, and she got really mad, and she stood up and she said to, you know, kind of just yelled to everyone like, everybody in this room is just a piece of shit, you know, and like got really mad. And I was like, whoa, I didn't know what was happening. I was surprised. Uh, and so instead of getting mad and like writing a referral or whatever, I looked at her and I was like, you don't mean me, do you? And then like nobody could get mad after that. Like she was like, no, I guess not. Like, you know, what are you gonna say, right?
Right.
And I think so I try to use that with my students a lot. Not that it's like a tool or whatever, but you know, like a good conversation with a kid can almost always lead me to, like, most people react certain ways for a reason, you know. So if a student doesn't want to do any work, or, you know, yells at me or refuses to get out their instrument or whatever, there's usually a reason for it, whether it's me or something else. And so just by having conversations and trying to show vulnerability, I think that's a really important thing. And where I lose is then, like, I can't really be like the hard ass band teacher that a lot of people want to be, you know.
Yeah.
And I, you know, some of those people are fantastic too, but I wouldn't say any of my students have any fear of me, but I think they do have a fear of what I think of them or
Hmm.
of the situation, and I think that's as powerful. And I
Yeah.
think that I don't, and I think it goes back to like what I said earlier about, like, I've never been the type of person who responds to that at all. Like, you can yell at me if you want to, you're gonna get just zero back from me. Like, as soon as someone does that, I'm not gonna respond at all.
Hmm.
You know, I think about a lot of my friends who are in military bands and service bands, and they have like these great careers. You know, I really admire what they've done a lot. And I think about that, like, day one of boot camp for me would just, that would be it. Like, I wouldn't, you know, if someone tells me what to do, I have a real hard time with it. I'm very much like a rebel personality in that way. And so I get it, you know. So like a lot of times, just yelling at a student or getting on their case or whatever, you know, a lot of people disagree, and sometimes I question myself whether I'm actually like doing the right thing or not.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think that's the way I get most of it happening, you know, and just like not being afraid to address things too,
Yeah.
you know. So like if we're talking about Like I think we're going to talk a little bit later about minoritized composers and stuff like that. And, so like it's okay to say like, well, there aren't a lot of Black composers that people are performing their music right now. A lot of times, I think younger version of me even would have been like uncomfortable saying that, or thinking like, oh, maybe this isn't something I'm supposed to say.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like it's real, it's the truth.
Yeah.
And I think that that's important. And so when we I talk a lot with my students about the world events, current events, and things that are going on, and the stuff that's going on in Minnesota right now, like with the police, and
yeah,
like it would be totally, like last night, just sending one of my seniors a text like, hey, I'm thinking about this, and like we'll have a conversation about it. That stuff's great, I think that we need more of that out there, and showing people that it's like okay to be wrong, or change your mind, or change your opinion after you've learned something new. Like those are all things that high school kids are terrible at for the most part.
Oh yeah, definitely.
They're really, really bad at that. Like they'll stick to an opinion until they're blue in the face and then some. It's like it's okay if you don't think that anymore, bud. Like you can a lot of different ways. I thought way different things when I was different ages.
Yeah.
So I think that's the key. Just showing them a good person and trying to be my best person every day. And it doesn't always. I have bad days too. We all do. Where I'm angry or whatever. But just trying to keep coming back to that place, I guess.
Yeah, and it sounds like what you're doing is you're building a culture of respect, and your students don't have to fear you to respect you.
I don't think so at all.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the band directors that are very like into like they need to fear you and you need to yell at them. I remember one of my master teachers told me like that when he was in junior high, one of the student teachers that was in charge of the group, like he was normally like a laid back guy, and then one day he just threw a chair. And my master teacher, when I was student teaching, told me like I should have that kind of moment where the kids like see that you're really taking this seriously and you really got to scare them. And I just like fundamentally I disagree with that principle that like you have to scare them to show them that you're serious. Like I think modeling that you're a like dedicated person to this craft is enough.
Yeah, that's exactly. I feel really a lot the same way. What you said, it's showing that you're serious about it and that you have a real commitment to what that it matters a lot to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and sometimes that might lead to a moment where you throw a stand off the stage or something.
Yeah,
and I've done that for sure. Especially early in my current position, where the group wouldn't respond to whatever I was trying to do for whatever reason. I remember my high school teacher doing the exact same thing, where they just like walked off the podium and said like, today's not the day, you're not ready today,
Mm-hmm.
and then I wouldn't do it every day, but once a year or something, that can be really powerful, because it's like I'm not saying yell or whatever, but like kids care about what you think if you let them. So if you're frustrated or whatever, the other thing that we talk about a lot, my colleague and I, is that you no matter how many chances you give people, like it's possible that they might just let you down every time. So if you're just waiting for like the time when like finally no one's gonna let me down, like you're never gonna reach that point.
Right.
And, so at that point, what are you setting yourself up for? It's just like an inevitable failure at some point. So yeah, I feel like we're on the same page with a lot of that. It's good.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the topic that you mentioned just a second ago, and that's how do we pick lit that represents minority composers?
So that's something we've thought a lot about in the past year. Have you ever checked out the Rob Deemer or the Institute for Composer Diversity? Are you familiar with this?
Do they have like a website that puts out a list of composers?
They do have a website.
Okay.
I don't know if they put out a list, but I think it's just Institute for Composer Diversity.com, or I'm sure if you did that on Google, you would find it.
Mhm.
Rob is a good friend that teaches at SUNY Fredonia. SUNY is like State University of New York. I know I've referenced that a couple times, but it's like UC in California. It's like all of ours are state schools are SUNY.
Okay.
And so he teaches at Fredonia, which has a really outstanding music program and music ed program.
Mhm.
And he's the composition teacher there. I met him a long time ago, and I've kind of known him tangentially on and off. But they've got this institute started where I think they're beyond lists now. They're up to like searchable databases of diverse composers of all kinds.
Mhm.
Gender and sexuality and racial diversity and all different kinds of metrics that they have. And it's just some of it's really great. You can search by, whatever field you're looking at and click on links to get to pieces and composers' websites. And I found it to be a really helpful resource.
Uh-huh.
And he came and did a professional development with all of our teachers and kind of has a little bit of a spiel that he'll do. And I'd recommend it to anyone, whether you're passionate about that topic or not.
Right.
Because for some folks in the room, like they'd never thought of it, and I think they left considering it. And then there were folks on the other end of the spectrum that is an important part of their planning, and they also got a lot out of it because he's just really thought deeply about it.
Mhm.
So that's sort of like the ending of the answer. But to kind of trace it back, it wasn't really something I ever thought about. Growing up for sure. And our school district is pretty unique because for New York, it's very large. We have 4 high schools, and it's the 8th largest school district in New York State. So I know, like in Texas and California, there are places where there's 400 high schools in a district or whatever. I get that.
Yeah.
But ours are organized a little bit differently here.
Mhm.
So for us, it's a big district, and the population of our students is almost exactly reflective in socioeconomics to the population of the United States.
Okay.
So we have some, really wealthy families, and we have some really very poor families, and all different variations of that in between. In terms of racial makeup, it's very similar as well. So one of the things that our district has been great about over the last, I don't know how many years, 5 years or so, maybe more, is just trying to talk about the idea of equity in all areas, whether that's music or any other content area or athletics or whatever.
Mhm.
And that's just to make sure that everybody has the opportunity, it took me a while to figure out what they were talking about because I guess I just didn't get it, but I saw a infograph or a meme, I guess, if you want to call it that.
Mhm.
And it was like a baseball field, and there were 3 people trying to
Oh,
watch
yeah.
the
I've
fence.
seen
Have you
this.
seen this,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
one can see right over, and one standing on a box and can see, and the other one, I don't remember exactly how it works, but it's like we just want everybody to have the same chance,
Yeah.
right, at things. Do you remember? You've seen something
It's a short person, and then someone who's slightly taller, and then like a really tall person, and the tall person can see over the fence just naturally.
right.
And then the middle person like stands on a box. And then the shortest person can stand in a box, but they still can't see into the park. And that's I forget. So there's like 3. That's equality,
Yeah.
right? So equality would be if you gave everyone like a box.
Everyone has the box. Yeah, you got it. Now we're getting it.
And then equity is the shortest person gets 2 boxes, the middle person gets a box, and the tallest person doesn't need one.
Right. So everybody gets what they need to have the opportunity.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And so that's been even though I couldn't remember it, that's been my best, that's my cornerstone in my head about what exactly that means. And so, in that focus, we're trying to look at all the different ways that things are skewed in an inequitable fashion. And so one of many is the kinds of music that's being played, and the composers that are being represented. And so we, in that specific lane, we look at how can we, get more music into our programs. And so the recommendation that they make at the Institute of Composer Diversity, which I think is great, is like a 15% goal. So the goal of having 15% of the music that you play in a year be from composers of minoritized background. So when you look at a school band program, if you have 2 concerts a year and you play 5 pieces on each concert, then you're only looking at 1 or 2 pieces that you have to, maybe change the way you're thinking, right? And this is just a recommendation, so it's not any kind of rule, and you can go above that or below that or whatever, and you're still a good person or whatever. But so if you have 4 concerts a year and you play 4 pieces, then it's like 1 or 2 pieces still, 3 pieces. And so so the first thing I think we have to do is we have to kind of all commit to that being an important thing. And then Rob's conversation about it is really valuable. I would recommend maybe him being a guest of yours, because his conversation about it makes so much sense. He said, like, where do people go to find music if they don't, or if it's not a piece you go to like J.W. Pepper, right? And J.W. Pepper relies on publishers to say what they should play. And if no one's buying music by, like, let's say, Black composers, then J.W. Pepper is not going to put it on the front page of their site, because it's a business. And they're trying to make money, and you can't begrudge them for that. And so who do they put? Well, they put, Frank Kelly's piece right on the front, because everybody likes that piece, and everybody's going to buy that piece, and they're going to see it and say, oh yeah, I know, like, every other band director that I know has played this piece. I guess I should too. And so I think that that's one of the most important steps to playing music by minoritized composers, is to play that music and to talk about it and say, like, this is why I chose this piece. And I do it at my concerts, and maybe no one in the audience even cares. Like, the parents just want to hear their kids play, right? But like the act of saying it out loud, maybe one person notices, and then that one person is going to help spread that idea, or at least becomes a conversation, And so we talk about it with my students a lot too, and they really take pride in it, or at least, and one of the national standards for a long time, I don't know if they've changed recently or whatever, but, was the idea of just like knowing about the music that you're playing. Knowing about the composer that you're playing. And so that's important for the kids, So when the kids play Granger, that's great too, and very, very important music, I think. And so, like, it's good that they know about Granger, and it's good to do some deep dives. And there's, like, Granger had some weird things about him that, like, are kind of interesting to check out, especially if you're in high school. Then they're, like, really exciting to talk about. And I think that's part of it, and I think that's true for a lot of composers. So the other part of it that's important to my students is that we want them to see examples of what they could be really happening, right? So, like, if I have a student who's a Latinx student who wants to be a composer, then, like, they're probably going to try to find composers to admire, right? Like, when I was a kid, I loved baseball, so I found baseball players that I really liked. And then those became my heroes and the people that I kind of modeled myself after, right? At least my early days. So if a kid looks to find, like, okay, well, I want to be a composer, and, like, let me see if I can find other composers, and they don't find any like them, then that tells them, like, well, this isn't really a thing that people like you do. And that's a big problem, right? And it's true from, even if we're just talking about from a performance perspective. So one of my colleagues, who's really, really brilliant, she did this great presentation about gender equity in music. And so that's another one that we're kind of focusing on and saying, like, well, almost her research found that, like, very, very few tuba players are female. And, like, she was trying to figure out, like, well, why is that, And a lot of it is because, like, if you don't see a lot of female tuba players, now I'm lucky, I have a great one in my band who's awesome. But, if you don't see a lot of female tuba players, then, a female who's trying to choose an instrument might look at it and say like, okay, well, I see people like me that play flute, and I see people like me that play clarinet sometimes or violin, and I guess those are girl instruments. And that's what I should play. And it, it's been that way for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Like, um, having my mom as a percussionist was like totally an anomaly. Like so many percussionists are male,
Yeah.
and it's getting better and better every year, I think. But our goal in our recruiting process is to create totally equitable versions of our recruiting videos. So we're going to have actually 2 different videos for each instrument, one male, one female.
Wow.
And so, and playing the same thing, and just so that like kids can see, like, hey, you could do this no matter what your gender is. It's a total option for you. And so, I think, as sad as it is to say this, I think that the biggest thing we have to do is like start doing it. If you want music played by minoritized composers, then people have to start playing it.
Yeah.
And create a demand so that more composers like that will write music. And let it feel like that's an okay thing, and you see some steps towards it, but I don't think it's like enough. I don't think that enough people are thinking about that. And one of the biggest counter arguments that you hear sometimes is like, well, there's a lot of great music out there by white composers, and so I could pick all day long music by white male composers and make great program after great program after great program. It's like, okay, yeah, it's true, but like we have to encourage these composers that it's okay to write great pieces and take chances. And, there are a few examples that are really fantastic. Like I'm really happy to see that Omar Thomas is getting his music performed all over the place and really becoming like a rock star in the world of wind ensemble music, which is great. Very well deserved. Another person who has a background in jazz, by the way, that's done a lot of wind ensemble work. But that's just one example, and there need to be a lot more of those examples. And I think college programs are as guilty, if not more guilty, of that than school programs.
Definitely.
I think that colleges need to be thinking about that as a top priority in what they do. And I think that all of a sudden, if you give it some time, colleges doing that will start to see like, well, wait, now it looks like we have a more diverse student body as well in our music department and our music ed department, because, we've been encouraging that kind of thing to be okay.
Yeah.
I think that's a really, really big deal. And I think before, anything else, it's just got to be something that people put in the forefront. And maybe more than just making a committee about it, or making like I know like some of the conferences they'll have like a round table. Here's a round table of minoritized composers. Like that's great, but like at what point do those composers stop having the label of being minoritized and are just like, here are the best composers for band? Like that needs to happen. Stop saying that this person's a female composer, and like we need to get it to the point where they're just a great composer, and those qualifiers can go away, but we got to focus on it for now, I think, and make it so that that becomes a top priority, and then eventually that'll be where we end up, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that theoretically. And it makes sense. You have students, and you have students of all sorts of different backgrounds, and you need them to see that everyone has access to this. Everyone can do it. It's not just white male composers. And like for a teacher to have that kind of perspective where like, I could pick Mozart, Beethoven, and Schubert like all day, or even any other composers, and not have a bad concert. Like, if you're a teacher and you think that way, like, do you only let your top students perform? Like, you're there to develop and encourage these people, and you're leaving them flat.
I think that without being too pessimistic, I think a lot of programs do look at it that way, and they do only cater to the best, or they do at the earliest stages shut kids out of opportunity. I was just on a call earlier with some local administrators of music, and they were talking about how one district was talking about how one of the metrics for deciding what a kid would play was academic achievement. Like they would look at what their grades were like and decide, like, I don't know, they didn't go too far into it, but like, so only a smart kid can play, whatever, or like only, or even like some of those music aptitude tests that they do, or timbre tests. Those are pretty inequitable. Like, that's not saying that everyone can have an opportunity. That's saying you have to meet this certain thing, like if my mom didn't play drums, I wouldn't have been able to play drums in school because I missed the deadline for the signups, and drums was already full by the time I got back to school. Like, I don't know what my life would have been like, but that was like such a fundamental thing in my world. And so, like, I got lucky, but if that didn't happen, there was a problem there. Like, maybe it should have been something that mattered. I think a lot of it comes back to the idea about, it's great to have excellence be a priority, and it's great to want ensembles to sound great and everything. But I think if that's the only priority, we're really missing the point. Like, when you look at like, like you're talking about the Midwest, right? You look at the Midwest and like what groups are chosen to perform, and it's like only the very best groups. What is that saying? Like, almost no one has the very best groups, otherwise they'd all be performing there. So like, that, what about like groups that are doing really great with the kind of music that they're performing, or groups that are doing really great with reaching diverse populations, or groups that have like this band has, every kid in this band also plays a varsity sport, or like, like there are so many different things that we can look at to determine whether our programs are being successful, besides like how many wrong notes are we playing. And I think those things are cool and those are great, and I love watching, some high school band from Texas play Maslanka 4 or something. That's amazing. That's so cool, but like, it's pretty unrealistic too, and in some of these things where they like, like conferences like that, where they're supposed to serve our entire profession, how much does that, other than like being a cool thing to watch, I don't know how much that really helps me get better as a teacher.
Right.
I know what I can listen to a great CD of, Northwestern play Maslanka 4 too, and figure out what that's supposed to sound like. Like, what, what else is going on? Like, how did you get them to that point? That's what I want to know.
Right.
I want to know what you're doing that made these students so good. Is if the answer is that they all just have enough money to pay for private lessons, now I'm like a lot less into it. Because then what did you really do there?
Yeah.
Help them out.
Definitely.
So anyway.
Okay. So let's transition a little bit to talk about Midwest.
Sure.
Have you been?
So I've never been to Midwest. That's a good thing to say. I've wanted to go a lot of times, and I've gone to a bunch of other great conferences, but not that one yet. It's hard when you have kids, because it's right at Christmas time,
Yeah.
So it's like, where did Dad go right before Christmas? It's hard to pull that one off. But soon.
Yeah, it's a weird time, especially with like school schedules like constantly changing. Like like late December is kind of weird.
Yeah.
I've been twice. Once was when I was in college, and I've found it to be like relatively liberating. I know the like kind of the negative a little bit is that like it kind of attracts what you were saying is people who are like, well, my band is excellent, so we're just going to perform, and there's nothing else to it. But a lot of the workshops and other things are very good for definitely new educators and like anyone else that's in the profession and kind of stuck. It gives you like new tools to deal with things.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
I've gone to so as a percussionist, I've gone to PASIC, the Percussive Arts Society convention, and that's I know what you mean about like feeling recharged and feeling really liberated after attending something like that. I've gone to that a bunch of years. I was on a committee for a while, and I performed there a couple of years ago, which was really great. I mean, I think any of those things I think are great. Anytime that you can learn more like, of course, there's never a bad time to be learning stuff. I think that sometimes, though, one of the things that I struggle with at those is like the herd mentality, right? Like where everybody says like, oh, this is amazing. And then like, if you don't think that that's amazing, then if you say it, you kind of look like an idiot, or else you have to be like, yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, that's great. And sometimes I feel like the momentum gets going on some of that stuff, and it's hard. I don't know. It's hard for me. Like, I'm a little bit more of an introverted person.
Sure.
And so sometimes that stuff wears me out. I went to the All Eastern, like the NAFME East a couple years ago, and performed there. And so I got to go and see some of the workshops there. And I felt the same way. Like I got like to the middle of day 2 and I was like, actually my hotel is really nice with the TV and taking a nap. Might be really cool. And so I think they provide great opportunities, but again, like I think if it doesn't broaden the focus a little bit and start to have, because here's the other thing, and maybe it's a personal thing more than I realize, but like if I go to so we have this great one in New York, NYSBA, New York State Band Directors Association. Okay. Really, really excellent organization, especially for the size. There aren't all that many of us that are members in New York State, but they have a 3-day conference in March every year. It's actually the last thing that I went to in public before the COVID stuff shut down, which I'm really glad that I didn't get COVID while I was at it. But it's a really, really great workshop, 3 days of some really good stuff. And it's pretty much just like the teachers from within the organization are giving presentations on stuff. But then they have a keynote. So like it was Mallory Thompson this past year and Michael Haithcock the year before. And some really, really, insightful folks. Dr. Tim was there one year, which is cool. And so, I really appreciate those a lot. But I said to my band director from high school, we're pals now, and so we were sitting next to each other watching this this band play Gillingham Heroes Lost and Fallen, I think is what it's called, right? It's this Gillingham piece about Vietnam, and like about as highbrow wind ensemble pieces as I've heard. Really, really beautiful, excellent piece, detailed. But I was like, man, this must have taken them forever to learn this piece, And I was looking around and, the people I knew and the people I didn't know. And I was like, how many of these people are ever going to conduct this piece?
Right.
Maybe no one, or one or two. And then we talked to the conductor afterwards. He's a friend of ours. He was like, yeah, I didn't think I'd ever get to conduct this piece in my career. And, but he had the right group or whatever. And I was like, yeah, man, like, there's a lot of other great literature out there, though, that, like, more people could deal with, Like, I would love to see a presentation that was, here are the best pieces, the level 3 band pieces, or here are some really amazing, like, intermediate level trumpet solos or whatever, like, I think about and snare drum solos, like, we have level 1 through 6 here in New York. And 6 is the hardest, and nobody really plays level 5 that much because you won't get into the honor group if you play level 5. So when I adjudicate folks, I hear people like hacking their way through these level 6 solos that are like way too hard, but they have to take that swing or else they're not gonna, they're not playing the game.
Right.
So I feel like a lot of what we do as music educators gets corrupted by that, like that need to be the best or that need to be, play the hardest piece or whatever. And there's great music out there at every level, like to go back to our minoritized composer stuff. Like we played Omar Thomas's arrangement of Shenandoah with my band this fall. And it is not, particularly hard, especially technique wise. It's nothing faster than eighth notes, and a lot of tied half notes and stuff. Beautiful. But it's such a great, great, beautiful piece, and it tells such an intimate story. It's he talks in the program notes about it being like a Shenandoah National Park, but on a rainy day, and so every time you see a picture of Shenandoah National Park, it's on a sunny day on, Google or whatever. But this, sometimes it rains there too. And we were just able to get so much out of it on an emotional level both me and my students. And that's, a piece that I don't know if a lot of people are going to talk about that piece because it's like too easy for so many groups.
Right.
But it's such a good piece, or like some of the older, like you want to talk about older music, like Frank Erickson, like Air for Band is,
Oh yeah.
It's like for us in New York State, it's listed as like a level 2. So like a pretty good 6th grade band could play it. But like as a professional group, you could play it and still get so much out of it, But I think that leveling or that like competition aspect makes it really hard. And I feel like some of those places like Midwest, not that they do anything that is wrong necessarily, but a lot of that stuff, it brings out that side of teachers and programs I think is not good. I think about my friend in Pennsylvania that has this like amazing percussion ensemble program. And they're in like pretty rural Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in a district where like you wouldn't expect, they don't have to be playing this well, and everybody would be like fine with it.
Yeah.
And so they should be showcased at like, Percussive Arts Society or something, and because it's not just about the final product. So they don't play maybe as amazing as like Ayala High School does or something like that in terms of difficulty. But there's a lot of teaching going on there too, and a lot of really, really hard work from those students, and a lot of expectations that are being far exceeded. And so I feel like I'd love to see more of a spotlight placed on some of that stuff, in our profession, because I just think it's more realistic to the average, you or me. Like, if I ever conduct a band that's playing that Gillingham piece, like I'll be amazed. Like it probably isn't going to happen. That's not from lack of trying.
Yeah.
It's just so many other factors involved. So I'd like to see that open up a little bit. I don't know if it's going to or not, but I guess that's why I go on, ask you to go on your podcast so I can say my little soapbox speech.
I mean, sure. I think it's important. Like I think I've said it almost every episode so far, but I think it's really important to have these kind of conversations and to have them like in the public square, so that like we can agree that like something needs to happen and that more people can be focused on these kind of issues and work to make good changes.
Yeah. And I mean, like I said, I used to teach a drum line that went to WGI finals, and we were A class and it was good. But yeah, man, of course I went and sat there and watched the world class groups, and what is it, Ayala, and what is the other one that's so good out there? I can't remember right now. California has so many of these amazing drum lines. Right? It's like I don't remember what they are now, but yeah, and that stuff is awesome, and like to do it at that level is amazing. But there's just others out there too that are working just as hard and doing some really cool things. Yeah. So yeah, I think the fact that you're talking about it on your show here is really valuable and very commendable. So thanks.
Yeah, great. So we're coming up on the end here. Last couple questions.
Cool.
So like ideally at the height of your career, where do you see yourself? Do you see yourself like basically in the same situation you are in right now, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think is this kind of like the where do you see yourself in 5 years question, or
I guess. Yeah, I just didn't. I don't want to put a time limit on it or anything. Just like what's your ultimate?
Well, yeah, I mean,
what are some of your goals?
I think it's probably no secret by this point in our interview here that the things that I'm excited about are seeing all of our students have the opportunity to experience music in the way that I have, and to see the value in it. And so to be more specific, I guess one of the things that we've talked about a little bit with some of my colleagues is you take that great ensemble, right? Like take Maslanka 4 as a benchmark, like a crazy high benchmark, but let's say that's your goal, right? Mm-hmm. So if I go to a school that's performing that piece right now, that those students have had so many advantages along the way. And I don't think that we should begrudge them for that. Like, that's great. I had a lot of advantages growing up too. I grew up in a really great community with, pretty much had everything I needed all the time. My parents were musicians. I had a lot of easy steps along the way. So what I hope then, we're working on trying to develop in where I teach is to be able to take our students who maybe don't have all those advantages and still be able to get them to that same point of performance, right? So like I don't talk about it all that often, but if I could summarize the goals that I have for our district in one little way, it would be like to be able to make it so that those kids can end up in the same place as these groups that we see performing on these stages,
Right.
And have them find ways for them to overcome all of the obstacles that they have, whether that's, playing on a great instrument. I mean, there are many, right? And like I said, it could go into a whole other episode of all the different things, but, from day one, family support, having an instrument, having supplies, and having a place to practice that's quiet and safe, and having your family encourage you, and going to a school where it's cool to be in the band. And, there are just so many things like all along the way.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm after, I think, in terms of our school district and my work as in this sort of administrative role, to try to encourage that. And we're taking steps towards it for sure. I think in terms of my own groups, I think it's very much the same. What I want for me is what I also want for others.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm, at this point, I'm past the point in my life where I'm worried about people. I feel confident that I don't have to prove anything to anybody right now,
Mm-hmm.
Which, took me a while to get to that point, no question. And we may not all be there, but I don't anticipate myself going anywhere else. I mean, maybe if circumstances are right, for my family or whatever, but I really like where I teach. I like where I live. My dreams of being a famous jazz drummer and playing at the Village Vanguard are pretty well past right now, which is okay. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with that. Just like I'm comfortable with, being okay with playing a level 3 band piece and having the band sound good on that. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's, I may be at the peak of my career. I don't know, but you never know, right? But I think that, that's what I hope. And I hope that we see more inclusivity at all levels and all of our perspectives here. And I like to play. I like to have the marching band in our district be really amazing too. Like, there are some of those things that are like fun.
Yeah.
That would be fun.
Yeah.
That'd be cool. But that's I think it. I think the goals are just sort of like guiding principles at this point. And I hope that everything we do sort of leads us towards those guiding principles. And I'm lucky, I have a group of music teachers that work with me in my district that are all like really, really fantastic people, and a lot of real visionaries, people doing a lot of great thinking and figuring out solutions to problems in ways that I never would have been able to. So we're really lucky. We have and it's a great place. Upstate New York is a great place to do what we're doing too. We're really well supported by our communities and our school district, and really, really fortunate. So I hope that we eventually get to have like schools again and concerts again.
Yeah.
That's a little bit up in the air right now, but
yeah.
Provided that goes back to a somewhat normal thing, that's what I'm hoping for. I'll probably make another album of original music at some point. I think that's kind of a hobby almost at this point, but I play pretty frequently in the area, and I love that too. And I get what I need out of that, so I'm happy. I'm pretty cool right now. I'm excited to watch my kids grow up and that kind of thing. So
great. Yeah, it sounds like you got a lot of good things going on.
A lot of good things.
Yeah. Okay. Final question. You can shout out, be grateful for, or whatever. Name a few like educators, musicians, people that you looked up to that you'd like to mention.
Yeah. My high school band teacher was Don Carducci, and he is still like real beacon for me. I love him like I love my parents. And the thing that I think is that I've learned as I've grown up a little bit is that his pursuit of knowledge has never ended. You know, he's retired from school teaching now. He still goes to every conference and listens to every presenter like they're the most important person he's ever encountered.
Hmm.
And, you know, it could be somebody, I mean, he's a great clarinet player. I've watched him watch beginner clarinet presentations. Like he knows every single thing that they're saying and probably has better ways of doing all of them, but he's still paying so close attention because he wants to learn everything. And, you know, when he guest conducts, I had him come in and work with my students, you know, never claims to know everything, but knows so much, you know, so humble. And I really owe a great debt to him. He pushed me really hard as a kid, and you know, he still continues to inspire me as a grown up here. So, so Don's one for sure. Another real great mentor has been this guy named Bill Tiberio here in Rochester. He teaches at a high school as well as a lot of local colleges, conducts the wind ensemble at the University of Rochester, and does some work at Ithaca College. You talk about just completely 100% dedicated to what he's doing. You know, I think he's having a really hard time during the COVID right now because I don't think he knows, like, I don't think he has a favorite show because I don't think he ever watches TV.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't think he knows what to do with downtime because he doesn't have any. You know, I mean,
Right.
he works constantly committed, and he's just in the purest sense committed to music and committed to making beautiful things happen through music. And he was my cooperating teacher when I student taught at the high school level, and you know, just the way he did every single thing. I tried to copy. I just think he's such a smart guy and such a kind and loving. And he's like one of the first people who really showed me like that it was okay to not have to be like tough and, you know, whatever. Like he's just such a warm person, just
Hmm.
kind to everybody no matter what. And so, you know, I really owe him a lot, and I tell him that a lot. I think he's great friend. Um, and I think that let's see, other people that I look up to. Um, I mean, I look up to. I'm inspired a lot, really, by like people like you that are younger than me, actually, that are doing the same thing I'm doing, um, because I think I have, in my most reflective moments, I think I have a pretty solid case of imposter syndrome.
Huh.
You know, like where I feel like I'm fooling everybody, even if I'm not.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that when I look at some of my younger colleagues, or people that I've hired and stuff, who I'm like, you could do as good as I'm doing right now. You know, like I needed these 15 years of teaching to figure out how to do what I'm doing right now. And
Hmm.
I think there are people that are 25 years old that are like doing just as good. That really motivates me, you know, to say like, well, don't just be satisfied now. Like,
Yeah.
keep working and keep going, and you know, keep trying to stay ahead of that. You know, and I think that's one of the things that really gets me um, kind of geared up to do more. Is just anytime I see somebody that's a lot younger, really killing it, you know, and really doing a great job. So that's really motivating and really inspiring. And you know, I think um, there's a whole world of people out there that I have a deep amount of respect for and am deeply indebted to. But I think that one of the coolest things about being a music teacher is the community. You know, like I feel like we don't know each other at all, but I feel like we could help each other if we needed it, and we would, either of us would be like, sure, I'll help you, you know, and like
Yeah.
whatever it is, you know, you come up here to go to a conference, or if I'm in California or whatever, and I'll say, hey man, like what, you know, I think that's a cool thing that we have this bond. And I don't know that math teachers maybe have the same bond. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And maybe they do. I don't know. They love quadratic equations or something. But like in music, there's this cool thing that I think happens because it's such an emotionally vulnerable thing. And so that's such a great thing. Going to a conference like we were talking about, um, you know, it doesn't feel like I have to do anything besides introduce myself, and people are like open to, sure, I'll send you like all this material that I have, or like
Yeah.
I'll give you my entire curriculum or whatever. That's just so great. I love that, and I think that I feel like lucky to be a part of that every day. I'm very thankful for the fact that I found something that I can do to support myself and my family that's so open. And so, like if you worked in business or something, like that's not how business works.
Yeah.
It's try to beat each other, but I don't
Yeah.
think we, hopefully in our best versions of ourselves, don't try to beat each other in music. I think we try to work with each other and make everybody's experience better. So, there are a lot of folks along the way. Like my wife is endlessly inspiring. My wife is uh, absolutely the most inclusive teacher I've ever seen. She works with people of all different kinds of needs, and treats each one of them with the same amount of love and care and respect. And that's something that I really learn from her all the time. She's at a school where a lot of the issues in terms of like things I'm talking about with socioeconomics, they're in a better shape in the community where she teaches, but
Mhm.
they deal with it on a whole other level. Like, so she'll have a concert. She had a concert once where they invited like the senior citizen choir came and sang with the kids,
Oh, wow.
and they invited their brothers and sisters of the younger siblings of the kids that were in their choir, and they made this choir of all ages. And like, that kind of stuff is just so fantastic. And they practice so much gratitude where she works. And um, it's just great. We're sending our kids to that school for that reason. Because it seems like everybody's such a good human being there.
Hmm.
So, I could go on and on and on about all the people that have helped me in my journey, but I guess I hope that because there are so many of those, I just hope that I can do the same for others and help
Yeah.
them in their path. So I definitely don't have all the answers, and I make, plenty of bad decisions every day. But I think at the heart of it, I hope people know that, my motives are true and pure, and hopefully that we, get somewhere together. So I hope that's good. I don't know. This has been a fun talk, though. Talking
Yeah.
about stuff is the best way, I think.
Mhm.
Just talking about stuff is so good.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much for your answers and all your reflection that you've given. It's definitely like you're confirming a lot of things that I already thought,
Yeah,
and it's good to have someone out in the community that thinks that way.
yeah, man. And I should say too, like I think a lot of the things I said throughout our talk here have been kind of like critical of people, or of like I talked a lot of things about Eastman that I didn't like, and then I talked about Midwest and said things I didn't like.
Hmm.
I certainly don't mean to. I don't want it to seem like that's, I'm not in it for the negatives, but I do like to reflect and try to find ways to improve things.
Yeah.
So I think that, like in any of those examples, uh, I'll go to Midwest for sure, and
Yeah.
I love Eastman with every fiber of my being, no question. But there are always ways that we can look back and find things that could be better. And I tend to opt, and my students will tell you this too, I don't tend to focus a whole lot on saying when things are good, because I think things by nature hopefully are good.
Yeah.
And we want to figure out what else we can adjust to help make things that aren't good into things that are.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm coming from. So somebody could easily listen to this and go, oh, this guy's just mad about everything. It's the
Right.
opposite.
Well,
Things are great.
I thought everything you said, for the most part I agreed with, and everything you said I thought was constructive. So
Cool. Well, that's good.
yeah.
Well, I appreciate it. Well, thanks for having me. I hope
Yeah.
people listen to this and like it.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. So when does it go on?